Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. This is the GBBC, the Global Blockchain Business Council and Global Digital Finance Global Leader Series, a global town hall with policymakers and business leaders to hear their insights into the emerging COVID-19 crisis and field questions from members of the community. Today, we are hosting the second episode of the series from New York with New York State Assemblyman Clyde Vanel and GBBC's CEO, Sandra Ro. You are welcome to ask questions throughout the session. We kindly ask that you submit these questions in the Q&A tab at the bottom of your Zoom screen, not the chat box. And without further ado, I will hand things over to Sandra Ro for an introduction.
Thank you, Sophia, for the introduction, and welcome everyone who is online. And we continue to see people logging in, so we will just keep going. I will start with welcoming our legislator, Honorable Clyde Vanel from New York State. He is incredibly busy right now, sitting at his home in Queens at the moment to spend some time with us, but he will give us some insight into what is going on at Ground Zero in the US, namely and particularly Queens, New York. Let me give you a quick bio for those who are not familiar already. Clyde Vanel is the chair of the Subcommittee on Internet and New Technology. He is an attorney, entrepreneur, private pilot, and community advocate from Cambria Heights, New York. He previously served as the chief of staff for New York State Senator James Sanders Jr. Clyde Vanel is also the owner and operator of Vanel Law Firm, PC, where he focuses on intellectual property law, business law, and wills and estate planning. He's also an internet entrepreneur, where he's the owner and operator of TrademarkReady.com, which provides trademark filing and protection services. Assemblyperson Vanel is his digital currency study law is the nation's first such law that was passed that creates a task force for stakeholders that will study cryptocurrency and blockchain technology in New York State. And I will add, I am a member of that task force, and we'll talk a bit more about that today. It will be joined with Governor Andrew Cuomo's task force to members who will be reporting by December 2021 now, which we'll also talk about because that goalpost has moved, on proper regulatory regime and definitions for the crypto industry in New York State. So without further ado, I'd like to have Clyde Vanel open up and give us some opening remarks.
First of all, Sandra, I have to say, thank you, and I'm honored to be invited here at this forum to speak about these different topics about where we are in New York with respect to coronavirus, and just to speak to your august group. I have to say also that it's been a pleasure working with GBBC. You guys do great work, not only in New York State, but across the country and across the world, putting together information, putting together events, educating lawmakers, policymakers, the industry on digital currency, on blockchain technology, on business, and the opportunities that are out there. So thank you for leading in that space. I also have to thank the Global Digital Finance for putting this together also. What's very interesting is, given coronavirus and where we are in the world, your two organizations sit in a special place. I'll start off with blockchain technology. Blockchain technology is a technology that is about trust and recording transactions. That is at its core. We are at a place now with coronavirus and COVID-19 where we need trusted recording of so much information and data, from something as benign as if someone has coronavirus, who were they in contact with? And what is that line of contact and who have they contacted? That is, and we have to be very sure about that information. The more sure we are, the better we're able as a government to make decisions for public health. And that is at the core of blockchain technology. That's what it is. When it comes to digital finance, we're at a time in New York where, and in the world, where we tell people we rather them not transact with physical cash. We rather them transact digitally. And how do we do that in a city where many people are unbanked and underbanked? How's that, how do we do that? How do we make sure that people don't have to exchange a physical unit or medium when we want to limit that type of exchange? So that's why, global digital finance, you guys are both of your organizations are in a great space. So that's why I'm excited even to have this conversation, because just framing it in digital finance and in blockchain and in technology on a whole is something that's important. Just speaking of technology, this situation that the world is in has caused many in the world to reframe how we deal with and what our relationship is with technology. Our education system, the way we educate our kids now, we are forced to do distance learning. Our entire city and in our entire state, from pre-K, from pre-kindergarten, our 3-year-olds are even doing distance learning. So it's a time where technology, we are more and more reliant on technology to function as a government and to function as a society. So your organizations are very, very important.
Right. Well, I think we'll take a moment here and talk about, a lot of people are looking at the fact that you've just gotten through, New York State in particular has just gotten through passing a $177 billion budget. And we know you've been a strong advocate for technology and making sure that there's entrepreneurship and innovative environment for those who are especially looking at blockchain and crypto. Can you give us a little bit of insight in sort of what has gone on with this budget process in light of what we are all going through in very extraordinary times, a bit about where innovation and technology stands, at least for the next year or two, as the budget's just been passed?
One of the things I want to say before I, delve into that is, right now in New York State, we have a robust testing program throughout the state, where in New York State alone, since last night, we've tested over 250,000 people, actually over 300,000 people. We tested 320,000 people yesterday. As of yesterday. Keep in mind, the first case of coronavirus in New York State that we knew about was on March 1. And on March 1, we're talking, only a month ago, we were concerned about someone who was in her apartment, and that weekend we dealt with it a certain kind of way. So much has changed in the last month, where today 130,000 people have tested positive across the state. Today, we've lost over 1,000 people in New York City alone. Yesterday, there were 8,000 new positive cases. Across the state, we're at, I don't have the exact numbers, but across the state, we're at over 5,000 people that have passed. And I know that people around the world are listening, because we are, this is a global series and folks call in and listen from around the world, and the whole world is adjusting and dealing with COVID-19. One of the things I want to say is that at the end of this, it's not just about statistics. We know, and many listeners are affected directly with this. Some of us are going to contract coronavirus. It's going to happen. Many of us know people that have contracted coronavirus and have overcome. Keep in mind, most people overcome it, but the vulnerable do not overcome it. And some of you that are listening know people that have died from coronavirus, or they know people that that are connected to folks that have died of coronavirus. So this is something that at the end of the day, we have to make sure, we have to understand that it is affecting everyone and everything, and that people's families are directly affected by, and these, for some people, it is the worst of times. One of the calls I have to be on pretty soon is one of the issues we're dealing with in New York City is that our morgues and our medical examiners' offices, where unfortunately where bodies are held after people pass, we are over capacity. So in a day or two, actually right now, we don't know where to put the new bodies, and every day hundreds are passing. That's the sad reality. What's hopeful is that over the past 2 or 3 days, the number of people that have been passing have flattened. We're hoping that we are at the peak. We're hoping that this plateau, hoping that it's on the plateau and it starts going down. So that's the good news. The good news is also people are paying attention. People are not, our first weekend when we heard about coronavirus and we, as in government, suggested people to stay home, many people did not abide by it, and many of our businesses did not. Since then, we've implemented stronger and stronger rules and edicts, and people have been following them for the most part. And that has had a great effect on flattening the curve and hopefully, getting on the other side of this. It's difficult. We understand it's difficult, and I'm sure it's difficult around the world. It's difficult in New York. People want to, places are closed down. People are at home. But everyone is, has their shoulder to the stone and trying to lift it up the mountain, and we'll get through this together. In that vein, lawmakers, we have to, government can't turn off. So we had to, in our Constitution, we have to pass a budget by April 1, and we did. And government has to continue to move. So we were able to pass a budget and other kinds of other very important legislation even during this time. But we have to make sure that society, that New York City and New York State proper, and the country and the world, we are all in this together, that we have to, and we will get through this together, and we'll do this smart, expediently, and we'll try to, and what we have to do is minimize the deaths the best that we can.
Thanks, Clyde. And I think you raise a good point about, and maybe this is something also we in the technology side, sometimes, I don't think we forget, but I think sometimes we don't keep it at the forefront of our consciousness, which is technology is best served when it serves society and humans. and now more than ever, the problems that we've seen unfold today around the world, some of it can very much be solved by technology and in particular blockchain and crypto solutions, but we need to keep in mind that there is very much a human element and a human trauma that's going on, which I appreciate you making sure that we all hear that message through and through as we get through this. If you could, give us some insight into, what was your thinking as the chair of the, of the Subcommittee on Internet and New Technology, and what has shifted since the budget has passed and now we're looking at sort of a very different future in many ways. How can the technology community at large help government and help society as we come out of this? I think there are a lot of use cases. You've already mentioned it. For those who didn't come in until a bit later, you mentioned, government not encouraging the usage of cash, which is kind of a big deal because then that leapfrogs digital currency or digital transfer of value. So can you give us some thoughts on, where was your mind before and how has it changed and focused going into the future?
So great questions. Sandra, the world is post coronavirus, and hope we will get to a post coronavirus, right? Things won't be the same. One of the issues in New York State and New York City was, there's been a movement legislatively away from digital financial transactions, meaning there were merchants around the city that accepted no cash, and the response for government were to penalize the merchants that do not accept cash, because, and reason being, and again, it's not that they're bad people. Reason being was that the idea is that there are many people that are unbanked or underbanked, people that do not have debit cards, credit cards, bank cards. So that people that are undocumented or people from a lower socioeconomic status that may not have access to those that kind of those kinds of finances. And that was some of the conversation. Now, keep in mind, Sandra, there are ways and there are tools to close that gap, right? There are countries where even, and I've traveled to some of them, where even folks that are homeless had access to digital finance. So it's possible, right? It's possible to do that. It's possible to close. But again, so it's interesting now where the conversation is, our constituents are concerned about when they go to the grocery store to purchase their items, they're concerned about the transaction of giving their money to the clerk, and then the clerk giving back the money, giving back change. Now that exchange is causing, rightfully so, a lot of anxiety for folks. And so people are talking about using, and I don't even want to, using the various methods of being able to transact at the point of sale without exchanging cash, whether it be a debit card, whether it be Apple Pay, whether it be swiped directly on your phone, whether it be, whatever it is, whether it to be even using a card and putting in your chip and not handing it over to the teller at the cashier, or even using kiosks. Folks were saying, is it better to go to a cashier and using their pad than using a kiosk that everyone uses? So These are the conversations, but great conversations to have. That's why it's great to have, great to be in this space. Also, this is there's been, overall, when it comes to technology and when it comes to legislation and regulation, the conversation about privacy is a big overall overarching conversation that's happening around the world, and what government is doing with information and data, and how to deal with the data, and how we should use the data, and what type of notice do people need when data is used by private companies, by government, that's a conversation that the world has been having, and it's interesting at this time. How do we deal with information? How do we deal with private information? How do we do it properly in a post-COVID era, where government needs needs information, needs to figure things out, needs to figure out how do we deal with health information properly in a post-COVID world, right? How do we do that? How we wrestle with where we come on these technology issues are very important. Now, those are some big overarching things to think about. But practically, how is government properly using technology? Sandra, you mentioned the budget, right? New York State had to pass a budget by a certain time. What do we do? And the way we pass a budget is, again, in my house, in the New York State Assembly, it's the lower house of the state. It's like the Congress. We have 150 members. When we have to conference and talk about these different issues around the budget, around legislation, we meet in a room. When we vote, we meet in a room when we come in and vote. You guys can see it on television what happens, which actually happened, but what happens when 4 of our members have contracted COVID? What happens when it's not a good idea for us to vote the way we've been voting, for us to conference the way we've been voting? Well, it forces government to use technology to close that gap. Even if we were fighting the use of technology in the past, even if some of our members are more mature when it comes to age and aren't very comfortable with technology, these times forces us to look at different tools, even technological tools, to be able to continue to conduct business. Look at what happened and how it forced our Department of Education to educate our children. We have in New York City alone, forget about the state, in New York City alone, our public school system educates 1.2 million kids. One day, our policy was we weren't sure if people should not go to, whether we should close the schools or not. Within a few days, we had to close the schools. Within a few days, we had to come up with policy and the way to educate each and every one of these children, down to 3-year-olds. And there was a technological solution. In a world where that is happening, where in order for us to function properly, and the tools are digital and technology tools, your positions are even more relevant and important. Just look at in a time where social distancing is the norm in every corner of this globe, technology companies, these different kinds of tools are what is keeping us connected properly. So the industry, and if you're in technology, you have an added responsibility to be able to innovate and to create and to build and to help society during these most trying times. There is no option. It must be done. And the people to do it are the people that are listening, are the organizations that are before me. It's a must. We have to, our relationship between technology and the policymakers, the relationship between tech organizations and government has to shift to something where it is more collaborative, because we don't have an option moving forward.
Thanks, Clyde. I think you actually raised some amazing points about when government needs to move, particularly in crisis situations. It can. New York, having the largest school system in the United States with 1.2 million kids, students, and getting them all iPads, digitally connected, providing the internet. I mean, that's a mammoth task. So it can be done. And it's not just education, but we're talking about money as we move to a cashless society. There are a couple of questions, actually a number of questions have come in while you were speaking. I'm going to ask you a few if that's all right from the audience. Starting with New York tech startups that are struggling right now, what advice do you have for them? How can they get help from New York in particular?
That's a great question. Thank you for asking it. And we're very mindful, that in New York, we are on pause. That means all non-essential businesses and workers are on pause, right? The economy is basically closed, but for certain sectors. So the technology companies, so many of my businesses, small and big, are hurting, and my small companies are hurting badly, and my small tech companies are hurting badly. New York City and New York State and the federal government has certain programs. I'll start off with New York City. New York City Small Business Services has 2 programs that they just rolled out. I hope that the timeline, I think we're still within the deadline to apply. One is a 0 interest loan program for for small companies up to $75,000, I believe, where if you, I believe if you can show that you are maintaining personnel or staff or what have you, and you could show a couple of things or what have you, but go to the New York City Small Business Services website. I don't have that off the top of my head. There's also another program where it is a grant program, low grants for small businesses, but they're both, I don't know what the criteria is off the top of my head, but those are 2 programs from New York City Small Business Services. New York State also has a program, has programs for small businesses. So you have to check the New York State EDC website, Economic Development Council. And then we also we just passed in the budget, which is not, I don't know when it's going to be implemented, but it should be implemented soon. Watch the governor's website for a payroll relief for companies that have a certain amount of employees during this time. But yes, we are very mindful, and the world is very mindful that most businesses are going to be struggling through this time. And if you are a New York City company, if you're a New York State company, we want to make sure that you're still in business when we get on the other side of this. We want you to be resilient, and we want you to continue to stay in New York. So this is something that we're very mindful of.
And then another question that's come up is, are you concerned as we move towards a cashless society of maintaining anonymity? And it touches upon the privacy and protecting consumers point that you mentioned. And I will also say, I think it might be something that the Digital Currency Task Force in the report that it puts together, I believe the timeline's been pushed out to December 2021 now, needs to seriously consider as well, which is obviously any recommendations around digital cash or digital currency have a very strong component with regards to security and anonymity, and or at least guardrails for how we look at that.
So good question. When it comes to as we move to as we're moving towards a cashless society, when it comes to making transactions, there are a number of things that we're concerned of when it comes to financial transactions, right? We're concerned with security, right? We don't, that's something that doesn't change, doesn't change whether it's digital or physical money. We're concerned with knowing, where this money is coming from. So that's something that that is always going to be concerned. That's always going to be, and it's a concern with cash, right? So for, when people talk about anonymity being something that folks are only afraid of in a digital world, no, we're afraid of that with cash, right? People do bad things with cash also. So, but when it comes to, digital transactions, I believe that as in my position in government, to work through what a cashless society would look like when it comes to, and again, right now, many transactions, understand that many transactions, and I don't know what the percentage is, but most transactions happen digitally now in New York City. Most people use a card when they go to a physical place or stuff like that. So that is just cash with a digital platform on top of it. So that happens a lot already. We're concerned about security with those kinds of things, and but when it comes to anonymity, if we move towards forms of currency as more, cryptocurrency, one of the things that we've done in New York was say that, listen, in order to figure all these bounds, in order to figure out the bounds and the regulations around and how to use the digital these kinds of new forms of digital currency, we voted a law to create a task force, which Sandra sits on, to be able to figure out these questions properly. And I find that, which is why when I opened up, I thanked these two organizations, is because industry and government, and stakeholders, we all have to work together to figure out what the world is going to look like and what the proper rules are around these new things in the world. Cryptocurrency, when we talk about anonymity, forget about, just digital, just using, just digitizing your money. That's one side. But cryptocurrency is something that is new. right? It was introduced in the world only 12 years ago. So no one can tell you exactly what, the answers to all these things. But together, I think with if the right kinds of stakeholders and government try to work through these answers together, is important. And the importance of blockchain technology at a time now where people must trust better, must be able to verify transactions and verify things. It's even more important now. The fact that we had to push the date back for the report for the digital currency task force to come up with a report for these, right? It's a good thing, because now we have to address even this topic with different eyes post-corona.
Sure, agreed on that. And along those veins, I think a lot of people are concerned in general about, things are absolutely getting delayed. There's a lot of postponements. There's a lot of just wait and see, and understandably so. There's a question here asking about, do we need to wait for a vaccine before things can, quote unquote, normalize, whatever that means? And how do we support the most vulnerable if these far-reaching closures continue for a year or 18 months? Do you share the view that it is going to take that long, or are there some mitigating steps in between?
First off, I have to really salute how government in New York State and New York City and the federal government now is responding. But I sit in the state. I have to really salute how our state is responding to this crisis, and how we're taking the proper measures, and also how we're thinking this through. I don't think that we're just waiting for a vaccine or for a vaccination. I think that is possible, and then what we're working through, how do we turn government back on? How do we turn the city and state back on? And we're looking at that based on the data. I think that we are step by step. I think that it looks like we're in a good space now. We're not sure, but we might be at what we call the apex, at the top of the mountain. Meaning we might be at a point at the point where most of the cases are high, and that where we're going to get less cases, where less people are going to test positive and less people are going to die from the coronavirus. And the new people that were infected and the new deaths numbers have been pretty stagnant over the past couple of days, even with more testing. I'll say that again. Even with more testing, the new positive cases and the amount of deaths per day has not grown like it has earlier. There was a point where the numbers were doubling, where they were growing exponentially. If it looks like we are flattening the curve, and it looks like that this social distancing is working, then it looks like that we have light at the end of the tunnel. Now, some processes by turning back on maybe eventually we might, the governor was talking about this. It might be something where we don't have all of society in New York social distance, but we can imagine we may move to a point where we social distance the most vulnerable. It might be something that where we where we also see that there are many people, 80% more than, 99% of the people overcome coronavirus, right? 80% of people have, 80% of people don't have to go to the hospital. There's going to be a lot of folks that have the antibody in them that are, so there is there is light at the end of the tunnel, and we're not, I don't think it's going to take us a year before we have some sense of normalcy. Can it be a few weeks? I don't know. It's going to be a month or two or what have you. I'm not, I don't think it's going to be a year, but we are in a time now where we're seeing, light of the end of the tunnel. But what's very important is that when we in government have certain mandates, that people abide by and pay attention, and that society polices that also, right? One of the things we had to do this week was double fines for people that don't abide by the social distancing mandates, from $500 to $1,000. We don't want to take your money, but if you're not abiding by it, we have to deter certain kinds of behaviors. And society should shun upon those folks that don't abide that, because it's not about, and it's the people that are not vulnerable, but it's not about you, it's about the people that are vulnerable. And that's something that if we abide by, and we're all in this together, I think we can get on the other side of this much sooner.
Yeah, and then as a add-on to that question, in your opinion, as a society, clearly we're learning some valuable lessons from this difficult period of time, but do you feel like eventually people just go back to, their old way of being? Do you think there will be a move to more localism? I think we're beginning to hear that, particularly in the US. Made in America, why are things not made in America? And a heightened awareness of, and does that put globalism at risk? And I'm talking about global trade and global business. If you have any views on that, appreciate it.
Look, things are going to change post-COVID, no question about that. And rightly so. I don't think there's going to be there's going to be a movement towards localism around the world, I believe. But that does not mean localism or globalism. That doesn't mean, there are certain things that, yes, there are certain things that we should do in-house. There are certain things that we should be able to make in-house, at least on a certain kind of level, right? But that doesn't mean that we're not going to. It takes away from our global commerce. For example, we should have some level of basic manufacturing in our country, right? We should not have any at all. We should not be dependent upon anywhere else for everything when it comes to manufacturing certain kinds of things. And in New York City, in New York State, we have a shortage of a basic PPE, personal protective equipment. We're talking basic masks, basic clothing, basic eyewear, basic gloves. So I don't think it's one or the other. I think that places, I think that countries, cities should have robust economies, but that doesn't mean that doesn't take away from our global economy. I think both can exist at the same time.
And how do you think, and this is another question that's come up, how do you think we move away from a society that has placed such a heavy emphasis on short-term gain and thinking to one that does think about investing in the future and thinking much long term. How can government, how can you help shift that mindset? Because particularly in the U.S., because of its service-oriented, consumer-oriented society, there is a fairly significant emphasis on short-term, pretty much everything.
Wow, that's a great question. My goodness. I mean, hopefully, so, government is our job to hopefully be in a position to be able to have the long-term planning. It's very important but it's difficult where, and I just have to be honest, we're in a system where there's a cycle, right? We have election cycles, right? And when we talk about politics, but it's very important for us to be able to understand, how do we come up with policy, right? Good policy for the public good, for public health, that where it doesn't matter, when it comes to public policy, it should be irrelevant based on when an election is. How do we make sure that good business for the public is irrelevant on quarterly filings, irrelevant on the fiscal report? Look, that's something that we have to, and these are tough, one of the things that, we have to look at, and this is a great question, we have to shift how we measure, what we measure, and when we measure. The world doesn't fall on certain. Sandra, I don't know if I'm going to answer this directly. I don't have the answer. One of the interesting things, even for us, was, Sandra, do you know that many states had to wrestle on whether we were going to reschedule our primary elections? And that was a struggle. That was a struggle because we said, no, people have to vote. But if people go and vote, in New York State and around the country, the people that work the polls are the vulnerable population. Is it worth still having the election because it's scheduled at a certain time? Is it worth your life? We had to say no. We have to have what we call a paradigm shift. And that question that they're asking is that, yes, should we have a paradigm shift on how business views, what the point of view with business in corporate America and corporate world, and in government. And yes, it's time for a paradigm shift. The how is we have no choice but to do it. This coronavirus thing, guess what? We can't even, as a lawmaker, as a politician, coronavirus should not be political. It's bigger than that when people are actually dying. It's bigger than that when we closed the economy, shut it off.
Yeah.
And I don't even know when was the last time the world shut off the economy, if they ever shut off the economy. So many things have to change, and how we look at things have to be reexamined.
I think you are spot on about your reference to reevaluating what we're measuring, how we're measuring, when we're measuring, what that looks like, because in many ways it is an opportunity to reimagine a better world where we do take into consideration many more factors. And along that line, it's hard to believe, but we're actually coming up very close to the hour. I wanted to ask you, there are a number of questions here that relate to obviously the most immediate crisis and around the most vulnerable. So I'm going to try to package a couple of these together. They may not directly have impact on crypto and blockchain at the moment, but I think it is these questions, there's quite a few of them actually related to vulnerable population and how New York State and New York City are dealing with everyone from the PPE shortages to obviously those who are on front lines, whether it's a grocery store or an Amazon warehouse. What is the state doing to make sure that companies are protecting their workers and that's enforced? Because there's a lot of picketing, and also it seems like at least the media is picking up that not every company is doing necessarily all the right things, and it may not be their fault, maybe about shortages, but could you give us some thoughts on that as we close out the hour?
Great point. I can tell you globally and locally what's happening. I'll start off with New York State. We just received big shipments of PPE from many different places. I mean, Apple just donated a whole host of stuff, and different countries have been helping. And we started off distributing that to our first responders. Because that is the first and first responders means the people that are in the hospitals, police officers, firefighters. When it comes to companies and businesses, I can give you a personal example. I got word that a supermarket in my district was not properly abiding by social distancing. So I contacted the manager, contacted the local police, and they had to change that day. So there's no talking about it or what have it just has to be done. And the people, the customers appreciated it more, and more people go there now when they trust a place that is abiding by social distancing. Social distancing and these kind of policies it's just good business, and the consumers see that and realize that and recognize that. So more companies and more places are on board, and when we find violations, we act swiftly.
Great. Well, thank you very much for that. I think one final, and let's try to leave it on a more happy note before I turn it back over to Sophia to close out. But if you look at promising trends in tech and entrepreneurs, in particular in New York City and New York State, what are you hopeful about? Obviously, you've mentioned more positive and direct engagement with government. There probably will come out of this entire awful scenario more opportunities for entrepreneurs to work with government to solve certain critical problems. Any thoughts on that?
Exactly what you're saying. I think that our reliance, and when I talk about I'm speaking of government, our reliance on technology is more and more apparent. So and I'm talking about, assuming the audience is mostly in tech. So your business, your ideas, your expertise is even more important now, and we realize that. So you have a great opportunity to be able to help society while helping yourself, and it's very important to be able to create tomorrow's tools. To be able to do a whole host of things, but technology is very key in moving this society forward in New York State, in New York City, in this country, and in the world.
Well, thank you very much for that. There's still a number of questions here, but we are coming up in the hour, so I want to thank Assembly Member Clyde Vanel for his time. He is on Twitter. If you would like to follow him, it's at Clyde Vanel. And also you can be found on LinkedIn and other social media platforms and your website. Please, thank you again for your time. And for those who are sitting in New York at the moment, we will get through this. For those sitting in other hot spots around the world, we wish you well. And to Sophia, I will hand over.
Thank you. And yes, Assemblymember Vanel, we thank you for your efforts and your leadership during these times and for taking the time to speak with us today and field questions from members of the community. We're very appreciative. Next Tuesday, April 14th at 9 a.m., Global Digital Finance will host part 3 of the series with Tarek El-Douani. That will be a discussion on the role of debt in the financial system and the implications that creates in a time of economic shock like the one we are experiencing today. Like Sandra said, please follow Vanel, GBBC and GDF for more information both on what's going on in New York and future episodes of the Global Leaders series. A recording of this session will be made available online. Thank you all so much, and thank you, Assemblymember Vanel.
Goodbye.